You are a woman in the Ituri rainforest 12,000 years ago. The labor is over. You are exhausted, bleeding, alive. And then the midwife's face changes because a second head is crowning. Two babies, two mouths. One body that can only produce enough milk for one. Nobody in your camp is smiling. They are already deciding. Your group is 14 people. You walk 9 kilometers on an average day. You carry everything you own, which is not much, and you carry your child, which is heavier than everything else combined. There is no formula. There is no bottle. There is no wet nurse waiting in a hospital corridor. There is your body, and there are now 2 infants who need it, and your body did not get a vote. And here's the strange part. Depending on which valley you were born in, what happens in the next 20 minutes ranges from your twins being carried into a shrine and fed before anyone else eats, to you being walked out of camp and never allowed back. Not the babies. You. The mother. If even one of your ancestors had failed to solve this problem, had spread her milk too thin, had starved trying to feed 2, had been exiled and not survived it, you would not exist. Every single person watching this is descended from someone who made it through a birth like that, or never faced one. The real answer to what ancient humans did with twins is darker and considerably stranger than the sanitized version you've probably heard. And it involves one specific piece of evidence, found in a cave in Austria, that overturned everything archaeologists assumed. I'm not going to explain that yet. Here's why this matters more than it looks. You probably filed this question under grim historical trivia, something unpleasant that happened to other people, long ago, in conditions you'll never face. It isn't. Twin birth is the single cleanest window we have into how human groups made decisions under conditions of absolute scarcity. And those decisions were not made by monsters. They were made by parents. People who love their children exactly as much as you love yours, working inside a resource envelope you have never once experienced. Roughly 1 in 80 human births is a twin birth naturally, and that rate has been broadly stable across populations for as long as we can measure it. It is not rare. Every hunter-gatherer band of 30 people would encounter it, repeatedly, across generations, which means every human society on Earth had to develop a policy, an actual, functioning, culturally transmitted answer to a problem that arrives without warning and demands a response within hours. That's the unsettling part. Not that the answers were sometimes brutal, that there had to be answers at all, and that the answers your specific ancestors landed on are part of why you're breathing. The mundane thing in your life that connects to this. Nothing. There's no object. That's the point. The problem was so completely solved by industrial infant formula and neonatal medicine that it vanished from your world entirely. And the vanishing was so total that most people cannot reconstruct what the problem even was. Let's start with the myth we need to demolish first. The myth is that ancient humans killed twins. Full stop. That infanticide was the universal, default, near-automatic response, and that anything else was a rare exception in unusually enlightened cultures. You've absorbed this from documentaries, from casual anthropology, from that one paragraph in a textbook. It is roughly half true, which makes it worse than a clean lie. The ethnographic record does not support universality. Anthropologists working from cross-cultural databases, the Human Relations Area files, and the Standard Cross-Cultural Sample, which catalog hundreds of documented societies, find twin infanticide reported in a meaningful minority of societies, not the overwhelming majority. Estimates vary considerably by how you code the data and which societies are included, and researchers argue about this constantly. But the pattern that survives every version of the analysis is that responses to twins were wildly, almost incoherently variable. Some groups killed both, some killed one, some killed neither and threw a feast. Some fostered one out to a neighboring family. Some believed twins were ancestors returning and treated them as the holiest people in the settlement, and the variation was not random noise. It tracked ecology. That's the finding that should reorganize how you think about this. Groups living under high mobility and low food predictability. People who walked long distances carrying infants, in environments where a bad season meant a real chance of group-wide starvation, show far higher rates of twin infanticide in the ethnographic record. Groups that were settled, that had storable food, that had grandmothers and aunts physically present and not walking 12 kilometers a day, show dramatically lower rates and frequently show twin veneration instead. Same species, same emotions, same love. Different math. The myth wasn't that it happened. The myth was that it was a moral property of primitive people, rather than an arithmetic property of scarcity. None of this is a moral failure. It's a supply problem with a human face attached to it. So let's do the actual arithmetic, because the arithmetic is where this gets genuinely difficult. The core constraint has a name: the inter-birth interval. It's the gap between one child and the next. And among modern foraging populations, it runs somewhere in the range of 3 to 4 years. The often cited figure from the Kung San of the Kalahari, studied intensively by Richard Lee and Nancy Howell in the 1960s and 70s, is around 4 years. That gap is not a cultural preference. It's enforced by lactational amenorrhea, the suppression of ovulation caused by intensive, on-demand breastfeeding, and by the simple physics of carrying. Here's the physics. A foraging mother carries her infant essentially continuously. Estimates of the total distance, A. Kung mother carried a child before it could keep up on its own run into the thousands of kilometers. She also carries water, tools, and whatever she gathered that day. She cannot carry 2 infants and forage effectively. Not for a season. Not for the 3 to 4 years an infant needs before it can walk the distances the group walks. Now stack the nutritional load. Lactation is metabolically expensive. Feeding 1 infant costs a mother roughly 500 additional calories a day. 2 infants in an environment with no caloric surplus is a demand her body may simply not be able to meet. Historically, twins were also born smaller and earlier, with lower birth weights, which is precisely the condition under which infant mortality spikes even with adequate feeding. So the decision, in the harshest environments, was not 2 babies or 1 baby. Researchers modeling this argue it was frequently 1 baby who probably lives, or 2 babies who probably both die, plus a mother who may not survive the attempt. That is the calculation. Stated plainly, without euphemism, because euphemism here is a kind of lie. But every group that made this calculation carried one specific weakness inside it. A flaw that shows up in the archaeological record, not the ethnographic one, and that suggests our whole framework may be missing something enormous. We'll come back to it. It's the strangest detail in this entire story. Now let's look at what people actually did, in specific places, with names attached. The Igbo of southeastern Nigeria. Twin birth was regarded as a profound spiritual pollution, and the documented practice was abandonment of the infants in what came to be called the evil forest, with the mother frequently exiled alongside them. This is one of the best documented cases precisely because of what ended it. The missionary Mary Slessor, working in Calabar from the 1870s onward, campaigned against the practice and personally fostered abandoned twins. Historians debate exactly how much credit belongs to her versus broader colonial and internal social change, and that debate is legitimate. What isn't debated is that the practice existed and was systematic. Now move roughly 1,000 kilometers west. Among the Yoruba, also in Nigeria, twins are called ibeji, and they are sacred, not tolerated. Sacred. When a twin dies, a carved wooden figure, an heir ibeji, is commissioned, fed, clothed, and cared for by the mother as though it were the living child. Thousands of these figures exist in museum collections worldwide. And here is the number that matters. The Yoruba have among the highest recorded twinning rates on Earth, with some studies of the region reporting figures around 45 twin births per thousand, against a global baseline closer to 12, 45 per thousand. 45 against 12. Read that number again, and then sit with what it implies. The culture with the most twins on the planet developed the most twin-positive theology on the planet. Whether high twinning caused the veneration, or something else drove both, is genuinely unresolved. Researchers have pointed to dietary factors and to a plant compound in a locally consumed yam species that may raise ovulation rates, though this remains contested and underpowered as an explanation. The correlation is solid, the causation is not. Across the Pacific. Among some Inuit groups, in an environment of extreme caloric constraint and extreme mobility, infanticide, including twin infanticide, is documented in the ethnographic literature. And it was framed not as murder but as a decision, discussed, made under conditions where the alternative was well understood by everyone present: different continents, different theologies, same variable underneath, doing the work. How much food is there, and how far do you have to walk? Here's the twist. You've been reading this as a story about killing. It's mostly a story about giving children away, the most common non-lethal response to twins in the ethnographic record. And this is badly underemphasized in the popular version, was fosterage. One twin transferred to another household, a sister, a co-wife, a related family in a neighboring band. The child was not abandoned. The child was reassigned. And the receiving household frequently wanted it, Because in societies where labor is the primary form of wealth, another pair of hands arriving in 8 years is an investment, not a burden. This looks disturbing to you because you're running it through a nuclear family operating system where a child belongs to two specific adults and any deviation is trauma. That operating system is historically bizarre. Anthropologists describe most human societies as practicing what's called alloparenting, care of children by adults other than the biological parents, as the standard configuration, not the emergency backup. Sarah Blaffer-Hrdy has built a substantial body of work arguing that humans are what she terms cooperative breeders, and that our unusually helpless, slow-growing infants are only possible because we evolved inside networks of shared care. Under that framework, splitting twins between two households isn't a tragedy. It's the system working exactly as designed. The infant gets a full milk supply and a full carrier. The mother survives. Both children live. And this reframes the entire question. The societies that killed twins weren't the ones with harsher hearts. They were disproportionately the ones whose alloparenting network had been stripped down to nothing. Too few adults, too much distance, too little food. Infanticide was what happened when the support structure failed. It was the failure mode, not the policy. Which brings us back to the loop I opened. The weakness inside the whole framework. The thing in the Austrian cave, the site is Kremswachtberg, in Lower Austria, and it dates to roughly 31,000 years ago, in the Gravettian period of the Upper Paleolithic. In 2005, excavators found a burial containing two neonate infants laid together, covered with a mammoth scapula that had been positioned over them like a shield. The infants were buried with more than 30 ivory beads. Genetic analysis published in 2020 in Communications Biology identified them as monozygotic twins, identical twins, making this the earliest confirmed case of twins in the human record. A third infant, a slightly older relative, was buried nearby. Now actually think about what that required. 31,000 years ago, in an Ice Age landscape, a group of highly mobile foragers, under exactly the ecological conditions that predict twin infanticide, stopped what they were doing. They dug a grave. They drilled ivory beads, which is enormously labor-intensive work, each bead representing significant time from someone who had other things to do. They arranged the bodies deliberately. They moved a mammoth shoulder blade over them. The twins died. The isotope analysis suggests one lived only a matter of weeks. But nothing about that burial reads as disposal. It reads as grief, expressed through the most expensive materials available. That's the weakness in the whole ecological model. It predicts behavior beautifully at the population level and tells you nothing about what any individual family actually felt. We can measure calories and walking distances. We cannot interview a Gravettian mother. The bead count is the only testimony she left, and it says something the arithmetic can't. Let's stack more evidence, but shift the lens. From bones to behavior. Look at non-human primates, because they run the same constraint without any culture layered on top. Twinning is genuinely rare in great apes. The standard reproductive output is one infant, intensively cared for, over a long interval. In the rare cases where twins are born to chimpanzees or gorillas in the wild, survival of both is unusual, and researchers have documented mothers effectively concentrating care on one. There is no ethics committee involved. It's the same physics, one body, one carrying capacity, one milk supply. Now look at species that went the other direction. Callitrichids, marmosets, and tamarins routinely produce twins as their normal litter, and they are among the most intensively cooperative breeders in the primate order. Fathers carry. Older siblings carry. Group members who aren't parents at all carry. The twins are only viable because the entire group participates in raising them. Obligate twinning and obligate alloparenting evolved as a package. You do not get one without the other. That's the cleanest available demonstration of the principle. Twins are survivable in exact proportion to how many hands are available, and now cross-cultural historical data, which points the same way. European parish records and foundling hospital records from the early modern period show twins with substantially elevated infant mortality, even in settled agricultural societies with no infanticide practice whatsoever. The baby simply died more often, smaller at birth, competing for a finite milk supply, more vulnerable to every infection going. In some historical populations, twin infant mortality ran at multiples of singleton mortality, which means something uncomfortable. In many societies, nobody had to make a decision at all. The outcome arrived on its own, and the culture built a story around it afterward. Here's the second reversal. and it's the one that should actually land. You live in a world that solved this. Neonatal intensive care, infant formula, pasteurized milk, obstetric surgery. Twin survival in wealthy countries today is so routine that the ancient version of this problem is genuinely unimaginable to you. That is a real, unambiguous, enormous victory, and nobody sensible is arguing otherwise. But look at what we solved it with. We solved it with technology and money, and we solved it privately. The ancient solution, the good one, the fosterage and alloparenting one, was a solution built out of people. Aunts, grandmothers, co-wives, neighbors who would take a child and mean it. That infrastructure was free, distributed, and required nothing but proximity and obligation. We dismantled it. Not maliciously. We dismantled it by moving for work, by shrinking households, by building a world where the nuclear family is the entire support structure. And then we handed new parents of twins a NICU bill and a phone full of advice from strangers. Modern parents of twins report exhaustion and isolation at rates that ought to embarrass a civilization this rich. The babies survive now, overwhelmingly. The parents are frequently alone. We traded a network for a technology, and the technology is better, and the trade still costs something real. Nobody should want to go back. Go back and the twins die. That's not nostalgia, that's arithmetic. 12,000 years ago, in a rainforest, a woman looked at two infants and lived inside a decision you will never have to make. Somewhere in Austria, 31,000 years ago, someone drilled ivory beads for two babies who lived a matter of weeks. They didn't have incubators. They didn't have formula. They didn't have a hospital 40 minutes away. They had aunts. They had grandmothers. They had a group that carried what one body couldn't. Some of them failed. Most of them, eventually, did. That's why the beads are in a grave. But enough of them held on, passed the children forward, kept the line unbroken, that you exist to hear about it. You didn't earn the survival of your own infancy. You inherited a species that got very good at carrying more than it could hold.